Jax's revenge domain. The wrench in my hand was still warm from the hydraulic line I'd just fixed when Mason Brooks walked onto the plant floor like he owned the place. It was 6:15 a.m., and I'd been there since 4:30 chasing down a pressure leak that would have shut down line 3 by morning shift. The kid had never seen the inside of our plant before 8 a.m., but there he was, clipboard in hand, acting like he invented manufacturing. My name's Hunter Wade. I'm 53 years old, been running systems at this Toledo plant for 25 years. Started as a floor supervisor right out of high school, worked my way up the hard way. No MBA, no daddy's connections, just sweat and knowing how things actually work. For the past 8 years, I've held together our biggest automotive contract, $8 million worth of precision parts for Ford's F-150 line. Miss a deadline, they find another supplier. Keep quality up and delivery on time, they keep writing checks. That morning, I finished torquing the fitting, wiped my hands on my coveralls, and watched Mason fumble with his tablet. He was 32, fresh Stanford MBA, and about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Word was his old man played golf with our CEO, and suddenly Junior needed a job. 6 months later, he was VP of Operations, making twice what I made and half the cents. "Hunter," he called out, walking over with that confident stride they teach you in business school. "What's the status on this downtime?" My dashboard shows we're running 12 minutes behind optimal efficiency. I looked at him, then at the hydraulic fitting I'd just replaced. "Well, Mason, your dashboard doesn't show that if I hadn't caught this leak, you'd be looking at 8 hours of downtime instead of 12 minutes. He tapped something on his tablet. "Right, but can we quantify the prevention metrics? I need data for my operational excellence report." "Prevention metric is simple," I said, pointing to the line that was now humming along perfectly. "See that? That's 47 guys who still have jobs today because the line didn't blow up." Mason nodded like he understood, but I could see his eyes glazing over. He wanted numbers for his spreadsheet, not real-world explanations of how things actually worked. "Okay, good. Just make sure you log the incident response time in the system. Corporate wants to track our problem resolution velocity." I didn't say anything to him after that. Just nodded and headed to the coffee pot. But I could see him taking notes, probably about legacy inefficiencies or whatever buzzword he'd learned that week. The real workers, guys who'd been here 15, 20 years, they all looked at me like they expected fireworks. I just shrugged. Let the boy play executive. I had work to do. Thing is, I'd trained half the crew on this floor, started taking on apprentices when I was 35, taught them everything from hydraulics to quality control. They called me Old Hunter, not because I was ancient, but because I'd been around since most of them started. I ate lunch with them in the break room, not up in the office with the ties. When something broke at 2 a.m., they called me, not Mason. Jerry Kowalski from maintenance had been here 18 years, Dave Martinez from shipping 16 years, Tony Richardson from quality control 22 years. These weren't just names on a payroll to me. They were guys I'd watched grow up, get married, buy houses, raise kids. Dave's oldest was starting college this fall. Tony's wife just beat cancer. Jerry was 3 years from retirement. We looked out for each other. My wife Linda had been worried for months. We'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner and she'd ask about the new guy, if my job was safe. 6 more years, I'd tell her. 6 more years and I'd have full pension, medical, the works. Just had to keep my head down and do what I'd always done. Keep the lines running, keep Ford happy, keep the money flowing. But even Linda could see the writing on the wall. "Hunt, that boy's got it out for you. The way he looks at you, like you're some old piece of equipment he wants to replace." She wasn't wrong. Mason had made it clear from day one that he thought the plant was full of legacy thinking that needed to be optimized out. He'd use words like right-sizing and operational streamlining in meetings, but what he meant was getting rid of anyone who remembered how things used to work, anyone who might question his brilliant new methods. The first real sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the hydraulic incident. Mason called a department head meeting to discuss process optimization opportunities. I'd been to thousands of these meetings over the years, but this one felt different. Mason had PowerPoint slides, color charts, graphs showing efficiency improvements and cost reductions, and right in the middle of it all, a slide titled Human Capital Optimization. "As we move forward," Mason said, clicking through his presentation, "we need to think strategically about workforce allocation. Some of our current staffing represents legacy approaches that may not align with modern operational paradigms." I raised my hand. "Mason, can you translate that into English for those of us who actually work for a living?" A few guys chuckled. Mason's smile got a little tighter. What I'm saying, Hunter, is that we need to evaluate whether all positions are optimally structured for maximum productivity. You mean you want to fire people? I mean, we need to ensure our human resources are deployed in ways that create the most value for the organization. Dave Martinez leaned over and whispered, "This kid's gonna MBA us all out of jobs." That's when I knew Mason wasn't just some harmless executive playing with spreadsheets. He had plans. And those plans didn't include guys like me who'd been here long enough to remember when the company actually cared about keeping good people around. After the meeting, I started paying closer attention to what Mason was actually doing. Not just the meetings and the presentations, but the real changes he was making. And what I saw wasn't pretty. First, he started with meetings, process optimization sessions, he called them, waste elimination workshops, digital transformation initiatives. I'd sit there listening to him talk about lean methodologies while half the terms he used didn't even apply to what we actually built. One time he suggested we leverage synergistic efficiencies in our production paradigm. I asked him what that meant in plain English. He said we'd circle back offline, but the meetings were just warm-ups. The real problems started when Mason began changing procedures that had kept us running smooth for years. The quality control checklist I'd written after the 2018 safety incident, refined through months of trial and error with Ford's engineers, got replaced with a template he'd downloaded from some Six Sigma website. The safety protocols that kept guys from losing fingers, streamlined for efficiency. The production schedules that actually worked, optimized by algorithms that had never seen a factory floor. "Hunter," Mason said one Tuesday morning, walking up to my station with his ever-present tablet. "I've been reviewing our changeover procedures, and I think we can reduce downtime by 35% with some simple modifications." I looked at the screen he showed me. It was a flowchart with boxes and arrows, the kind of thing that looks impressive in a conference room but means nothing on a plant floor. "Mason, this shows 8 minutes for a tool change on line 2. That's physically impossible." "Well, according to the theoretical optimal specifications." "According to reality," I interrupted. "It takes 15 minutes minimum to safely swap those dies. The hydraulics alone need 3 minutes to cycle down, and that's if everything goes perfect." Mason tapped his screen. "But if we pre-position the tooling and optimize the sequence, you mean if we skip the safety checks and hope nothing breaks? I mean if we think outside legacy constraints and embrace innovative approaches." I stared at him. "Mason, those legacy constraints are the difference between meeting deadline and explaining to someone's wife why her husband isn't coming home." He smiled that business school smile. "Hunter, I appreciate your conservative perspective, but we need to challenge conventional thinking if we want to remain competitive." That afternoon, he implemented his new changeover procedure. 40 minutes later, Tony Richardson was in the emergency room with a lacerated hand because the die hadn't seated properly. Mason's response was to schedule a training session on adherence to optimal procedures. The guys on the floor started coming to me with questions Mason couldn't answer. Jerry asked about the new maintenance schedule that had us servicing pumps every 6 weeks instead of 4. "Hunt, these things are going to fail if we stretch it that long." Dave wanted to know why the shipping schedule showed 2 hours to load a truck when it actually took 3. "Mason says we need to optimize our logistics velocity," Dave told me. I told him velocity don't mean nothing if the truck tips over because we rushed the load. But the worst part was watching Mason take credit for work I'd been doing for years. Every monthly report to corporate, every efficiency improvement, every cost savings measure that came from knowing how things actually worked, it all became operational excellence initiatives under his leadership. My name disappeared from documents I'd written. Systems I'd designed got labeled as recent optimization outcomes. I started keeping copies of everything. Not because I was planning anything, just habit. 25 years of covering your back teaches you to document what you do. Every email Mason sent overriding my recommendations, every safety flag he ignored, every time he said we'll iterate later when I pointed out a problem. I had a folder on my computer labeled New Management, and it got thicker every week. The breaking point came in early October. I was running pre-shift checks when line 2 threw a hydraulic alarm. Nothing major, just a sensor reading high pressure. Standard procedure was to shut down, investigate, fix if needed. But we were behind on the Ford delivery, and Mason was in the control room when the alarm went off. He keyed the radio. "Hunter, can we bypass that sensor and keep running? We need these parts out today." I looked up at the control room window. He was up there with his tablet, probably watching our efficiency numbers tick down. Negative, Mason. That's a safety interlock. Sensor trips for a reason. But what's the actual risk? Can we quantify the failure probability? I'm looking at the cost-benefit analysis here, and downtime is expensive. I set down my wrench and walked to the radio. Several guys had stopped what they were doing to listen. Jerry was shaking his head. Dave looked like he wanted to climb up to the control room and explain things to Mason personally. The actual risk, I said. Keying the radio so everyone could hear is if that line blows, it'll take half the plant with it. And probably a few good people too. I understand your conservative approach, Hunter, but we need to think strategically about operational flexibility. According to my risk assessment matrix, Mason, I cut him off. I've been doing this since you were in diapers. The line stays down until I say it's safe. The radio went quiet. Around the plant floor, guys were looking up at the control room, then at me. This wasn't just about a hydraulic sensor anymore. This was about whether experience mattered, whether safety mattered, whether guys like me still had any say in how things got done. 20 minutes later, I found the problem. A seal was starting to fail, would have blown within the hour if we'd kept running, could have killed someone, definitely would have shut us down for days. I fixed it, logged the repair, sent Mason a detailed report explaining what would have happened if we'd bypassed the sensor. His response was to remove me from the morning production meetings, streamlining communication channels, he called it in his email. No discussion, no explanation, just gone from meetings I'd been running for 8 years. A week later, my access to the Ford Quality Portal was revoked. The weekly client calls disappeared from my calendar. My production reports started getting edited for clarity before they went to corporate. Mason was systematically cutting me out of my own job, piece by piece. But here's what Mason never bothered to learn. I wasn't just some old-timer collecting a paycheck. Back in 2018, we'd had a major safety incident that could have killed 3 guys if I hadn't caught it during routine inspection. It was a Wednesday in March 2018, around 2 p.m. I was doing my weekly inspection of the main hydraulic manifold when I noticed something that didn't look right. A hairline crack in one of the pressure fittings, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking close. But I'd been around hydraulics long enough to know that hairline cracks don't stay hairline for very long. The fitting was rated for 3,000 PSY, and we were running at 2,800. Plenty of safety margin according to the specs, but specs don't account for metal fatigue, temperature cycles, vibration stress. I shut down the line immediately and called for Jerry to bring his inspection kit. "Looks fine to me, Hunt," Jerry said, squinting at the fitting. "Barely see anything there. Trust me," I told him. "This thing's about to let go." We replaced the fitting that afternoon. Cost us 3 hours of production, missed our daily target, got some grumbling from the day shift supervisor about unnecessary downtime. But when Jerry pressure tested the old fitting, it failed at 2,850 pounds per square inch. 10 minutes more at operating pressure and 3,000 pounds per square inch of hydraulic fluid would have turned into a bomb. The blast zone would have included workstations for Dave, Tony, and a new kid named Miguel Santos who'd been with us all of 2 weeks. Instead of going home to their families that night, they'd have been going to the morgue. Ford's risk management team heard about the near miss through our insurance company. Their director, Morgan Phillips, flew in from Dearborn the next week. Sharp woman, probably 45, talked like she'd spent time on factory floors before she got her MBA. We walked the plant together, and I showed her exactly what had almost happened. "Mr. Wade," she said, standing next to the new fitting, "how many people would have been in the blast radius if this had failed? 3 for sure, maybe 5, depending on where the evening shift supervisor was standing. And you caught this during routine inspection?" "Yes, ma'am." Though it wasn't on the official checklist. Just something that didn't look right. Morgan made notes on her tablet. "How long have you been doing these inspections?" 8 years on this system, 20 years total. You get a feel for when things aren't quite right." She nodded. "Ford takes safety very seriously, Mr. Wade. We can't afford incidents like this, either in terms of human cost or business continuity. We need to know that someone with your experience is always watching out for these situations." That conversation led to 3 weeks of meetings between Ford's legal team and ours. Contract renewals, liability clauses, safety compliance requirements. Most of it was lawyer language I didn't pretend to understand. But one part was crystal clear. Section 7.3b of the new contract named me specifically as safety compliance lead. Not my department, not my position, me personally. Hunter Wade. The clause required my direct involvement in all safety-critical operations. And here's the kicker. If I left voluntarily for any reason, Ford could terminate the entire $8 million contract immediately. No penalties, no transition period, just done. It's their insurance policy, our legal counsel explained to me. They want to know that the guy who prevented a major incident is still on the job. I signed the paperwork without hesitation. $8 million of business security tied directly to my continued employment made me feel pretty important, honestly. Like the company finally understood what I brought to the table. But that was before Mason arrived. Now, watching him systematically dismantle everything I'd built, I started wondering if he'd ever read the contract he was playing with. Every meeting I got excluded from, every procedure he changed, every safety protocol he streamlined, it all violated the spirit of that agreement. Ford hadn't just hired our company, they'd hired me specifically. The irony was beautiful, really. Mason was so busy optimizing me out of the picture that he never bothered to understand why I was in it in the first place. By November, things had gotten worse. Mason's efficiency improvements were showing their true colors. We'd missed 2 Ford delivery deadlines because his optimized changeover procedures kept breaking down. The new quality checklist he'd implemented missed 3 defects that made it all the way to Ford's assembly line before they caught them. Each incident generated paperwork, phone calls, meetings with Ford's quality team asking pointed questions about what had changed in our processes. Morgan Phillips called me directly after the second missed deadline. "Hunter, what's going on down there? We're seeing problems we haven't had in years." I chose my words carefully. "We've had some management changes, Morgan. New procedures, new priorities. And where do you fit in all these changes? That's a good question." She was quiet for a moment. "Hunter, you know that contract clause we put in place after the safety incident? That wasn't just paperwork. Ford's board approved that deal specifically because you were the named safety lead. If that changes, everything changes. I understand. Make sure your management understands too." But Mason didn't understand. Couldn't understand. He was too busy playing corporate politics to realize he was sitting on a time bomb. And I was getting tired of watching him fumble around with explosives. The end came on a Monday morning in November. Company-wide meeting, all hands, mandatory attendance. 140 people crammed into the main conference room and dialed in from 3 other facilities. Mason was presenting quarterly results, talking about operational improvements and strategic realignment. Same corporate jazz he'd been peddling since day one. I was sitting in the back, next to Jerry, Dave, and Tony, the guys who actually kept the place running while Mason played with PowerPoint. They knew something was up. The whispers had been going around for weeks. Old hunters getting pushed out, making room for fresh blood, optimizing human capital allocation. "Moving forward," Mason announced, clicking to his next slide, "we're restructuring our operational leadership framework. Transitioning away from legacy management approaches to embrace next-generation paradigms." Here we go, I thought. Time for the big announcement. Mason looked straight at me. Hunter Wade will be stepping back from direct production involvement to allow for innovative operational strategies. The room went dead quiet. 140 people, suddenly silent. Jerry shifted in his seat beside me. Dave looked like he wanted to say something. Tony was staring at Mason like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Then Mason did something that changed everything. He picked up the microphone and said, "Any questions about our new operational direction?" I raised my hand, slow, deliberate, so everyone in that room could see it. Mason looked right at me, made eye contact, nodded like he was going to call on me. Then he turned away and pointed to someone in the front row. "Yes, Sarah from accounting." Sarah hadn't raised her hand. She looked confused. I didn't have a question. "Okay, anyone else?" Mason asked, looking everywhere except at me. My hand was still up. Jerry nudged me with his elbow. "Hunt, he's ignoring you on purpose." I kept my hand raised. Dave leaned forward, staring at Mason with obvious disgust. Tony was shaking his head. Around the room, people started noticing what was happening. The guy who'd kept their plant running for 25 years being dismissed like he didn't exist. "I have a question," called out Jerry, his voice carrying across the room. Mason's smile got tighter. "Jerry, let's save operational questions for the appropriate forums." "This seems pretty appropriate," Dave said, standing up. Hunter's got his hand up. He's got something to say about this restructuring that affects him directly. Now people were really paying attention. The room felt electric, like everyone could sense something big was about to happen. Mason looked trapped, cornered by his own corporate theater. "We can discuss implementation details offline," Mason said, his voice higher than usual. "Right now, we need to focus on the big picture strategic initiatives." That's when I knew. He wasn't just ignoring me, he was muting me. In front of 140 people who knew exactly what I'd contributed to this company, Mason was erasing me like I'd never existed. Like 25 years meant nothing. Like the $8 million contract I'd protected meant nothing. Like the lives I'd saved meant nothing. I slowly lowered my hand and stood up. The room went completely silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming, someone's coffee cup clinking against a saucer. Everyone was watching. "Thank you for the clarification, Mason," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I think I understand the new direction perfectly." Mason tried to regain control. "Excellent, Hunter. I knew you'd be supportive of our optimization efforts." I didn't answer. Just walked out of the room, past 140 pairs of eyes that knew they'd just witnessed something they'd never forget. Behind me, I heard Jerry's voice. "Real class act there, Mason." I drove home in complete silence, didn't turn on the radio, didn't call Linda to tell her I was coming home early. Just drove through Toledo thinking about 25 years of getting up at 5 a.m., 25 years of fixing other people's mistakes, 25 years of being the guy they called when everything was falling apart. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked in at 11 a.m. "You're home early," she said, looking up from her coffee. "Yeah," I said, "I think I'm done." She studied my face. After 28 years of marriage, she could read me like a book. "What happened?" Kid muted me, in front of the whole company, made it clear I'm not part of his new vision. Linda set down her coffee cup. "So what are you going to do about it?" That afternoon, I pulled out the Ford contract and read Section 7.3b for the 10th time in 6 months. The language was crystal clear. If the named safety compliance lead resigned voluntarily, Ford Motor Company could terminate the agreement immediately without penalty or transition period. I opened my laptop and started typing. 1 page. Simple language. No corporate buzzwords, no strategic initiatives, no operational paradigms. Just facts. Effective 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, I am resigning my position as Senior Manufacturing Systems Lead. This resignation is voluntary and final. Thank you for 25 years of employment. I printed 2 copies, signed both, put one in an envelope addressed to HR, kept the other for my records. Then I called Morgan Phillips. "Morgan, it's Hunter Wade." "Hunter, good to hear from you. How are things?" "Well, I wanted to give you a heads up. I'm resigning tomorrow morning." Silence on the other end. Then, "Hunter, you understand what that means for the contract?" "Yes, ma'am." Section 7.3b, I helped write it. Can I ask why? Let's just say the new management has made it clear that my services are no longer valued. I see. Hunter, you know I respect you tremendously, but I have a responsibility to Ford shareholders. If you resign, we'll have to exercise our termination rights. I understand completely. It'll be effective immediately. No grace period. That's what the contract says. Next morning, I drove to the plant for the last time. Parked in my usual spot, badged in through the main gate. Morning shift was just starting up, guys checking their assignments, coffee brewing in the break room. "Hey, Hunt," Jerry called out. "You okay after yesterday?" I handed him the envelope. "Jerry, can you make sure HR gets this when they come in?" Jerry looked at the envelope, then at me. His face went pale. "Hunt, what's this about?" "Just time to go, I guess." Word spread like wildfire. By 7:30, the whole plant knew I'd resigned. By 8 o'clock, Mason was on the floor looking panicked. By 8:30, Parker Jensen from legal was making frantic phone calls to Detroit. By 9:15, Ford had exercised Section 7.3b. The termination notice came through official channels. Morgan Phillips signed it herself. Professional, final, immediate. The $8 million contract was void. No discussion, no negotiation, just done. I was at home having lunch when my phone started ringing. Mason called first, voice shaking. "Hunter, there's been a misunderstanding. We need to talk." "No misunderstanding," I told him. "You made it clear yesterday that my input wasn't welcome. I'm just giving you what you wanted. But the Ford contract, should have thought about that before you muted me, son. By end of business, the layoffs started. 47 people, good people with families and mortgages. All because a 32-year-old MBA thought he was smarter than 25 years of experience. Mason lasted 2 more months before the board asked for his resignation. Great Lakes Manufacturing offered me a position the same week I resigned, better pay, signing bonus, and a plant manager who'd worked his way up from the floor. These days, I sleep better than I have in years. Sometimes the best revenge is just walking away. But it sure doesn't hurt when walking away costs the other guy everything. 25 years taught me that loyalty only works when it goes both ways. And when it doesn't, make sure you've got the paperwork to prove your worth. They say knowledge is power, but the real power comes from knowing exactly when to use what you know.